In this episode, we are going to have a look at a checkbox group, multi-select checkbox group. The first thing we're going to do is to create a new mixing that we're going to be using not only with this file, but also with any other multi-selection, multi-check components later on. So under the input directory, let's create a new file, and it's going to be a view file. So a multi-select input. And within this file, we're not going to be rendering any templates, so we can remove this. We won't be using any properties. We will import, however, our base import. So import base input from, and it's in the current directory, base input. Now, obviously, we need to register this as a mixing. So mixings, and within the array, base input. Then from the data, what we are going to do is to add the property called selected. And selected will take the current value, so this current value, which will be passed through as an array, because obviously multi-select will have multiple items. And if that is empty, then we are going to just use an empty array. Next, we are going to override the implementations of reset and clear methods. So reset, and let's add the stuff for clear as well. From within the clear, we're going to start with clear this emits, and we're going to emit this selected, which will reset at the same time to an empty array. So when we're clearing, we set selected to an empty array, and that's what we're emitting from within this component. On the reset, we are checking if this current value, if it's present, then this emit, and we're going to pass this selected equals this current value. Same thing as before, we are setting this selected to the current value, and then we are emitting it as well. After that, we hit return to terminate the execution of this method. If the value was not provided, if the value was empty, then we simply call this clear to emit an empty array. Okay, that's these two methods. Then another method that we're going to have here is the helper method, which will check if the given value is inside of the selected collection. So is selected, and we take the value, and what we're going to do here is use return this selected, and the method includes, and then we pass the value through as an argument. So check if the selected array includes this given value. Our multi-select input mixing is now completed. We'll reuse it with some other components. So let's now save and close it. Within the input checkbox, let's create a new view file. And this time we are going to call it Checkbox Group. So Checkbox Group. And from within this component, we are going to start by importing this multi-select input. So import multi-select input from, and we are importing this 2 levels up, multi-select input. Now let's register this as a mixing. So mixings, and within the array again, multi-select input. Okay, we're not going to have any props, so let's remove this section. We're not going to have any data. We will have mounted method, so mounted method, which will first check if this selected property on our multi-select input, if it is selected, then emit the event. So emit this selected. So all items that are within this selected array will be emitted to the wrapper. Other than that, just a standard initialize, and register listeners. So this register listeners. With the multi-select, we will need an access to the list of available options. To do this, let's open our base input, and let's add a new property. We are going to add this property after the current value. It's going to be called options, and it will be of the type, it's going to be array, it might be object, but it also might be a string. And default value will be an array rendered by the anonymous function. We will also add a method to our base input. If we scroll down under the clear method, we'll add another option which will generate the option ID. So option ID, we will pass the option through as an argument, and here we're going to check if option has index ID, then return it, so option ID. Otherwise, we are going to return this name, so name of the input concatenated with the hyphen and then the option value. Where this is going to be used, when we are going to loop through the list of options, each option will have name and value properties associated with it. But sometimes we may also add ID, at which point when we are going to be creating input, its ID property will be either this ID associated with this option or what we concatenating here. So it's going to be, let's say, name 1 if the value for the given input for the given record is 1. So we either specify this strictly with what we are passing through to the options property, or we just concatenate it ourselves. Okay, so that's our base input. We can now save and close, and let's start building our templates of the checkbox group. We're going to start with a div with the v show. We only want to show it when we should show it. So show property, and then class, we're going to bind our computed wrapper CSS class, and then style as well, which will be computed wrapper CSS style. After this, within this div, we're going to start with another div with v4 directive, and we're going to take option in options. The key will be option value, and then class, we're going to specify checkbox group item. Within this iteration, we're going to start with input, which will have type. This time it's going to be checkbox, and we have ID of, and this is where this option ID will come into play. But rather than just using this method, because this specific, whatever this method will return will also be used with the label, so I'm going to create a variable here. So option underscore ID equals option ID method, and we pass option as an argument, so option. Now we have this option ID available. We can use it with the label later on. Now name, which comes from name again, we will have our disabled attribute coming from disabled, is disabled property. Then we have autocomplete equals autocomplete. We have value, which comes from option and value, so whatever we have associated for the given record. Then we have checked equals is selected method from within the multi-select input we've created earlier, option value. So this will check whether this given record with this given value is within the selected collection. And then class will just use input CSS class. And the last thing, on change, we want to trigger update method. We'll add this method in just a second. So let's just actually add the method stop for the time being, update. It will take event. And after this, we create this label, and it's going to have dynamic for taken from this option ID variable we've created on the go here. And then v text, just to take option and its name as a label. Okay, so that's our template. Now let's go back to our update method. And the first thing I'm going to do is to create a constant called value, and we'll take event, target, and its value. So the value associated with the given input after the event has actually happened. And then we are going to check if this is selected, and we pass through value as an argument. And if it is selected, then we need to remove it. So it's going to be this selected collection, and we're going to filter it. This selected filter each element in this collection, arrow function, and we check element does not equal value. So return only those elements that don't match this value. And we obviously overwriting this collection here. Then else, we need to add it. So this selected push, and we push the value. And then we need to emit it. So this emit, and we pass this selected as an argument. So once we filtered our selection, then we're emitting it with all values that are currently being checked. Our component is now completed. We can save and close the file. Let's open components.js and let's add it. So checkbox input, and actually let's call it checkbox group input, and it's going to come from checkbox group file. Okay, if we save it, close it, go to our terminal, let's run npm run dev once more. And if we now go back to the editor, first of all, I've added this array colors to our collections on the form wrapper to make sure that colors are being collected as an array. Now I've also added, you can see I've collapsed the previous items here. So we had this consent and so on, these other checkboxes. I've added another column, I've added colors, which requires exactly 2 items. Now validation, I've started with validation outside of this checkbox group input. Our validation will only be displayed when there is a problem with the colors, when there is an index on the errors collection. Validation, the field is required. It needs to have exactly 2 items selected. So we have minimum 2 items, maximum 2 items. We will display it as block item. Then we have our checkbox group and our component, newly registered checkbox group input. And we have the group we pass in again dynamically taken from the props form wrapper. Then we have name, colors, and our options will be a blue, green, and orange, values as string. Then we have obviously our model, which is colors, and our validation passed through to the component itself as an array, because obviously we're not displaying validation from within the component, we're displaying this above the component. There's only 1 validation needed, not 1 per each checkbox. And that's it. So now if we save it and preview everything in the browser, refresh, and you can see we have colors. If I open view console as well, let's just go to view. There we go. If we go to form wrapper, let's have a look at the fields. There we go. Colors is empty at the moment. If I start checking, you'll see this is being filled with the values associated with the checkboxes. If I select all 3, hit on submit, you'll see we have validation message because we only should have 2. If I select just 1, the same message will display. But if we select 2 of them, validation is succeeding in this case, and obviously we only have 2 items, which is what we are after. And if we now go back to the editor, let's add current value, and let's specify that we should have blue checked already when the page loads. If we go back to the editor, refresh the page, and there we go, that's checked. Let's see our fields and colors. You can see there's 1 item, blue index. If we start adding, obviously that changes as well. In the next video, we'll have a look at the multi-checkbox selection.